And it's not normal for me to do broadcasts from my own home because usually my own home is full of my family. But since they're away on holiday, I have a little bit of quiet time and I thought I would do a little evening broadcast this evening. Now, one of the main reasons I wanted to broadcast today on, what is it today, the 12th, is it? Let me just check my diary. You know what I'm like with dates, but let's sort of check what day it is today. Yeah, so Thursday the 12th of September and Friday the 13th. Unlucky for some tomorrow. But anyway, on with the programme. And there's a couple of things that were announced today in the news, which you're probably already aware of. But the Labour Party has announced two things. And I think when I say the Labour Party, I really mean the Labour government here and Keir Starmer and his cronies. Now, one of the first things that we all know is that the Grangemouth Oil refinery is now going to close permanently, robbing Scotland of 400 direct jobs and countless thousands of other jobs which went into supporting the network, which basically provides food and water and services to the oil and gas institution, if you like, the only oil refinery in Scotland at Grangemouth. Now, you might be wondering, well, why is it closing? Because it's well known that the Grangemouth oil refinery is actually pretty profitable. So there's nothing wrong with it on a business model. So why does it need to shut? Well, the answer to that lies in politics. As usual, the British government has decided to rob Scotland of something which every oil producing country in the world has, which Scotland is going to be robbed of, and that is its ability to refine its own crude oil into products such as petroleum. So, petrol for cars, diesel for cars and lorries, aviation fuel, which is basically kerosene or paraffin, and countless other chemicals which are useful for all kinds of things from cosmetics and medicines to plastics and fibres. So it is a massive loss to Scotland's economy. But why has the British government decided to do this? Well, many of you out there who support independence have probably already put joined the dots together and figured this out, that this is the British government basically trying to make Scotland completely dependent on England for its refined fuels, which means that our oil is now going to be piped into the north of England, bypassing our own closed refinery, where all of these people have been made redundant. It's going to be refined in England, producing jobs in England and making more profits for the English refineries, of which there are five, which is unusual for a country which doesn't have any oil of its own. But anyway, the point of the matter is that the money is going to flow south, the jobs are going to flow south, and Scotland is going to be left having to buy back its own oil in the form of petrol and diesel and aviation fuel and all the rest of it at massively inflated prices. Does this sound familiar at all? Just think about your energy costs. Where do you think your gas comes from and your electricity? Well, it doesn't come from England, does it? But why are we paying so much for it? Well, because it's siphoned off and it is basically sold back to us at a vastly inflated price. So this is the last remaining piece of the Scottish jigsaw puzzle as far as the British state is concerned. And this is the last shackle to be applied to the arms and legs of Scotland, so it cannot get out of the Union, and it is forced to buy back its own resources at massively inflated prices from the very people who stole it in the first place. So it is a political act. But how did the British government manage to get Ineos, which is an Anglo-Swiss company run by an English billionaire, Richard, what is his name? Radcliffe? No, I can't remember his first name, but Mr. Radcliffe. Anyway, he is a multi-billionaire and he sponsors things like very expensive yacht racing in the America's Cup. But he has been basically bribed by the United Kingdom, who offered massive inducements for Ineos to set up a petrochemical plant in the Netherlands, where it was going to make an awful lot of money, but only on condition that it closed Grangemouth. So you can see how this is working. The English government has persuaded a billionaire to close down an oil refinery in Scotland on the promise of opening a new one on the continent in Europe, in the EU. Now, this is an interesting move because, as you know, Scotland was dragged out of the European Union when English voters decided to pull up the shutters and keep everybody out, including all of the imports and exports that we used to enjoy and all of the massive amounts of funding which the European Union used to provide to us. Anyway, all that aside, I think Ineos was tempted not only by the money and not only by the fact that it could set up a new refinery elsewhere, but the fact that it would be a refinery in the European Union where Scottish oil could be taken directly in tankers, bypassing the whole of Scotland and probably most of England as well, and going directly to, say, Rotterdam, where that oil could be offloaded and refined by Ineos and sold in the European Union. What a lovely, sweet deal that is. But that leaves Scotland minus 400 direct jobs at Grangemouth and probably thousands of others in the service industry surrounding it. Now, as well as that news, this is an interesting one actually. The Labour Party has now turned its attention to the English NHS. Now, ironically, this might actually have a positive effect on the Scottish NHS for reasons that I'll tell you about in a minute. But the main thing I would say here is that Keir Starmer has put conditions on his plans to, I think, to rebuild the English NHS. He claims that he wants to stop the Tory underfunding. Now, the Tory plan was originally, and I think everybody knows this by now, was to keep underfunding the NHS until it collapsed and then introduce full privatisation as the magic cure for the problem of healthcare. Now, according to Starmer, he doesn't want that. But what he has said is that the new funding to go into the NHS and the reconstruction of it and the rebuilding of the English NHS will come with one condition, and that is that it is reformed. Now, reforming any public body, particularly a government agency or a big bureaucracy, and remember, there are hundreds of thousands of people, professional people working in the English NHS. It's a huge organisation to reform, and reform usually means making efficiency gains, and that usually means either cutting services or forcing people to work harder for longer hours for the same or less money. Now, we know that the English doctors and nurses in the NHS down there have forced Labour to give them a huge pay rise, but they only gave them that huge pay rise because they were embarrassed into it by the better wages in the Scottish NHS. So now we have a situation where if the English NHS is refunded and reformed and gets the investment necessary to save itself from privatisation at the hands of the Tories, then the funding that's pumped into it and the so-called reforms, which incidentally would not apply in the Scottish NHS, but the funding would. So whatever extra funding is pumped into the NHS by the Labour government in Westminster, 8% of that has to be reflected in the so-called Barnett consequentials in our block grant. And that would mean that funding for the Scottish NHS would increase. So at the same time as removing billions of pounds worth of oil from us, removing hundreds or possibly thousands of jobs from the central Scottish belt oil industry and all of its subsystems, Keir Starmer is almost accidentally going to help possibly build up the Scottish NHS funding slightly. It remains to be seen how much this will be, but by a curious, bizarre twist, we might actually end up with a better NHS at the same time as losing all the jobs, all the oil, all the gas, and all of our renewables to England's grid or its pipelines or its refineries. Now remember, England doesn't have any oil fields of its own, maybe one or two, but it does not have the vast fields that we have. And you remember Sir Ian Wood back in 2014 telling us that the oil was running out and Scotland could not rely on oil to help itself to become independent. And what do you know, 10 years later, the British government's issuing 138 new drilling licenses to tap into massive new oil reserves, which Ian Wood forgot about when he said that the oil was running out. So the whole thing, as we can all see it, and it's pretty obvious to anybody in the independence campaign what's going on here, Scotland is being tied tighter and tighter into the UK so it can't escape, being made more and more dependent on English oil refineries for our fuel, English energy companies for our energy, and all the while our bills go further and further up. And then we get this tiny little shred of hope that our NHS might see a slight rise in funding because of something Keir Starmer has finally decided to do, but we remain to see just how much he's planning to do with it. However, at least it's a recognition that the English NHS is virtually bankrupt and is about to go under, whereas the Scottish NHS, by comparison, has been at least managed well with the limited funds that we have, and we have a good NHS. We don't have the waiting lists that the English system has, and it's much easier to get appointments here, see a GP or a dentist. Okay, it's not perfect, but it is better. Now, let me come to the final item tonight. This is finally a piece of good news. The Scotland Channel, if you remember, I was trailing this a few weeks ago, has finally broadcast its independence support documentary. Now, this was a documentary which the Scotland Channel had desperately wanted to make for a long time. They interviewed many people from the independence movement, including myself in one or two places, but also paying a lot more attention to the founder of Salvo, Sarah Sawyers, who explains why the union between Scotland and England is not what it appears to be, and why Salvo will be going to international courts to ensure that the people of Scotland are given the right to self-determination, something which Keir Starmer and every other UK party will not give us. We've been denied democracy. We're ruled from outside of our own country. We're having all of our resources exploited against our will, without any permission, without any transfer of ownership granted through the union treaties. So generally speaking, we are actually a colony. And Sarah set out how we could prove this in the documentary. My part in the documentary is pretty small. I was asked a few questions. I think I maybe appear 4 times in this documentary about what I felt should happen next. But remember, this documentary was shot about 2 months ago, and it also was finished just as the final results were being tallied for the recent general election. So it is up to date as far as it goes, but some of the things I said in this documentary are perhaps a little outdated now. But I definitely recommend that you watch it. It has already had thousands of views right from the moment it hit the internet. So go to YouTube and look for the Scotland Channel. Now, the Scotland Channel is the name of the TV channel. Now, the Scotland Channel is planned to expand into a daily channel with regular streamed and regular timetabled programmes over a period of months and years as it develops. And the idea of the Scotland Channel is something which I have wanted to do for a long time, which was to produce a new independent all-Scottish television channel which has no bias whatsoever against independence and looks at the truth of Scotland's real situation, but also characteristically produces good news stories and documentaries about why Scotland is such a great place to live and why it should be independent and why it has no business being trapped in a union against its will. So please watch the video, enjoy it, let me know what you think. I will hopefully be back in the Inde-Car shortly. My poor car has suffered from a bit of, I think you'd have to say, a stroke in its little brain, and it's decided it doesn't want to move anymore. So it's going for a software removal, basically having its little brain wiped clean and then reprogrammed with uncorrupted software, which should fix all the problems. In the meantime, I'm not off the road completely, but I do have to carry a jump starter unit with me wherever I go, just in case the car decides it doesn't want to start. But I will be back in the Inde-Car very shortly. And if you enjoy this home stuff, like Indie Lounge, if you like, or Indie House, then let me know, because I can always do some more of these broadcasts from the house. Anyway, that's it for me tonight. I have had some health issues as well in the last few days. I ruptured my right eardrum, and those of you who know me will know that I'm already deaf in my left ear. So when my right eardrum was ruptured, I basically became deaf for 2 days. So I wasn't really able to broadcast. I wasn't able to teach or earn money for a couple of days. But the eardrum has started now to heal, and I'm beginning to hear properly. So I thought I would touch base with you tonight and just let you know I haven't forgotten about you. And not only have I not forgotten about you, but neither has the Scotland Channel. So go onto YouTube, look up the Scotland Channel, and look for a new documentary which asks the question, is independence dead and buried? My answer to that is no. And if you like Monty Python, you might remember these famous words. It's not so much dead, it's more resting. And I think that is pretty much where the independence movement is at the moment. It's pretty healthy. There's still the same number of people wanting independence, maybe more, who knows. But certainly we haven't given up. And despite our politicians being hogtied at the moment, unable to do anything at all really to liberate themselves from the current situation, that will change, especially when Salvo's international court case is heard. And when we get a ruling which says that Scotland is entitled to self-determination and that the Act of Union was not an act of self-determination at all because it wasn't actually democratic. Nobody in Scotland in 1707 got to vote on it. It was decided by 16 nobles and merchants. And basically they decided that they would just accept English bribes and sign this thing off, condemning the whole of Scotland to 300 years of being trapped in a union and having all its resources exploited. And we know where we're at with that. Anyway, that's it for tonight's Indie Lounge video. And I hope you enjoyed it. And you'll join me again soon in Inde-Car. But in the meantime, as I always say, keep the faith. This fight's not over. It's barely even begun. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.